first, uh, please introduce yourself?
My name is Kathy Ray Huffman. I'm an independent curator and writer. I live in Southern California. It's a
Thank
sunny
you.
day here, as usual.
What is the earliest memory you have of working with art and slash or technology?
Well, I actually started in what was then called technology, which would be video and sound art, when I was a grad student in the 1970s. I started in just being interested in video and trying to help. I had a job at the Long Beach Public Library, and the librarians had purchased some video equipment to do oral histories, and they couldn't figure out how to do it. And they had shelves of empty tapes that they had recorded, and so I went and took a short tutorial at the interactive television program at Cal State Long Beach, and was taught by this older woman uh, who she said, "Listen, if I can do it, you can do it." And so I said, "Okay." She said, "If you can use a toaster, you can do this." She was pretty cool, and so I started doing the video for the book, different things that the library did that they wanted to have recordings of. And then when I went into the museum studies course at Cal State Long Beach, I did it so that I could have access to some gallery space, because I thought that was the only way I'd ever really get to know more about this medium, is if I could work with an artist. And of course, I was a student and I had no possibility to get a gallery or space. I didn't even know how to go about that. It was just a dream. So I entered this class, and by this time I'd been reading a lot about video and knew that it had a lot of potentials for education, for expression, for documenting things. And I just thought it was a pretty interesting thing, but nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew what the word video meant. And so I sat in this class and we went around in a circle and everybody said what they were interested in. I was the last one in the circle. So everybody had their, printmaking, weaving, I don't know, different things. Everybody had their own ceramics, and everybody had some aspect of art that they were interested in pursuing. And it came to me, I said, "Oh, I'm really interested in video." And I looked around this table and it was nobody knew what the word was. So I can remember thinking to myself, I got a lot of work to do. So that from then on, then I did an internship at the Long Beach Art Museum, which was, and I didn't realize it when I started all this out, but it was the West Coast Center for Video Art and Video at that time. It was a pretty dynamic program. And I became an intern to the David Ross, who was the deputy director in charge of the video program. And, I just jumped in feet first and did all the things that you do to make shows happen. And I was just hooked. In 1980, so this was all like maybe in 1975, 76, 77. I had became curator through a series of events, people leaving, and my friends saying, "Joe, go and apply for the job." So I did, and they chose me because I was the local girl and just finished my MFA in Museum Studies program. And I was invited to, because of the West Coast perspective, I guess, to organize a program of video for the Paris Biennale. So it was 1980. And it was the first time I traveled abroad to Europe. And it was the first time I'd seen any artist working with a computer at that show. So I was intrigued.
That's good. There's a lot of memories.
Yeah, well, it's just, it's not a straightforward story. It's like a lot of things, and when you start looking back, you realize a lot of things come from different ways, and
Mm.
you just choose a way to go, and things happen that you never planned.
What is your experience working with Web 3D and what is being commonly referred to as the metaverse? these days?
Well, working backwards, this is the metaverse. I'm probably like everybody else. I participate in online forums and Instagram, different things. So I'm part of that group. Otherwise, I have nothing to do with it. And I'm very doubtful that we are able to do anything about it. The Web 3D, I became aware of it, geez, I guess back in the 80s. I was on the SIGGRAPH art show jury, and I did an exhibition of artists using computers in 1983. And it was a big show. It was a California artist, and it was some of the earliest works that were involving 3D imaging and various, I mean, all kinds of things, from plotter drawings and performances and everything, but photography. But the 3D stuff was pretty interesting. And I think from there, I just kept my ear to the ground. And I was on the jury of the art show in 1985, got introduced to some of those ideas that were percolating in the technical community. And then I think it was 1989 at SIGGRAPH in Boston. By that time, I was the curator at the ICA in Boston. I was introduced, and I heard Jaron Lanier talk, and he was talking about virtual reality. And I went out to the San Francisco Bay Area and visited him in his studio and have him explain what he did, and then invited him to come and give a talk at ICA. So it was, from that point, VR was big, heavy things. It wasn't very interesting. You had to have all this equipment and big computers. And I think when VRML got introduced a little bit later on, it was first VRML. It was because it didn't need all that stuff, and you could still manipulate space. And so that was quite interesting. And that came along with a group of artists that I worked with in Germany called Van Gogh TV.
In our research, we found an article, a Switch article that discussed the art exhibition VRML that you co-organized with in collaboration with Carol
Dudasek. Yeah, Dudasek.
Dudasek
Yeah.
for the Web 3D. Can you tell us a little bit about how the exhibition came about? Are there any works from the exhibition that stand out to you today?
I had to actually look it up because I didn't remember all the works. It was a long time ago. It wasn't the first show we did. Carl was, he had the domain, and I had the connection to the art world and the art experience. And he was an artist, a performance artist, and had worked with this large group of artist to do a big project at Documenta, and so I knew him pretty well from that. I've worked with that group. So we met some people who were doing this work, and we thought it would be kind of fun to do and I'd been working online quite a lot since 80, when was it? No, it must have been 95. Yeah, 95. So we were both really embedded in internet practices, and we knew that 3D was happening. And so we put out a call, and we just organized an exhibition. I think the first one came after 1997. I went to Monterey to the Web 3D Consortium to see what it was all about. And of course, it was really technical. And they had an art show, which was two workstations that nothing was really working. So we thought, well, that's not a very good art show. So we decided we would do one. So we had a big response, and big international response. There were quite a number of artists from all around the world, so it was quite an exciting discovery. Yeah.
What are some challenges that you face when exhibiting Web 3D art? How do you engage your audience in digital art experiences that might not be exhibited within a museum or a gallery context?
Okay, so my part was to bring it to a gallery context and to put it into a museum context, which I was able to do. It wasn't happening in museums or galleries. A couple of places did show some 3D works. There was some shown at the Whitney Biennial, for example, a work by John Klima and another work, which I'll look up her name. Anyway, in the beginning, there was no standard software. Okay, so we got all these submissions from around the world, and everybody had their own proprietary software. People were not just using the basic VRML, coding which was pretty simple. I think it had very big polygons, and it was quite easy. It wasn't very, according to I'm not a program, but according to the people who made the work, it wasn't complicated. So they gussied it up, they fixed it up, they made it really complicated. And so it was really exciting to see all these works. But we had to download the software. We had to then make that software available to people who might look online to see the work, because they would have to install that software to see the one work. So when you get 30 works that use about 20 different softwares, you might understand the complications that occurred.
As a pioneering digital curator, how does it feel to create new opportunities for artists and pave the way for other collecting and exhibiting institutions?
I don't know how to answer that question, because I was never ambitious to try to think of. I was as curious as anybody about all of this, and so I was learning at the same time my audiences were learning. And I think it was maybe my enthusiasm that rubbed off on the audiences, because I found I would have to be present, to talk to people who might not know what, even people who worked with the technology often didn't understand what the artists were trying to do with it or why they were doing it. They said, oh yeah, we know that software, but why are they doing it using that? So we were more concerned with the content, how people were using this new possibility to show content, and what could they show and what could you experience by using VRML or 3D software.
One of your early projects, Holes in Space by Kit Galloway and
It's
Sherry
whole in space, not holes. Whole.
Hole?
Whole. It's singular. Whole in space.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz. Yeah.
At Long Beach Museum of Art is regular featured in CADRE classes at San Jose State. When as a pioneering work in virtualization and technological augmented co-presence, when I showed the work to students, I'd like to show a clip of the project that includes news reports that shows the public reaction, which was astounding. People falling on their knees when they see and speak to a loved one across the country. Can you explain the project and tell us about its genesis and impact from a curatorial standpoint?
Well, it probably shows my ability to take risks. The project was the artist's work. They envisioned it, they organized it, they put it together. I was the institutional person who said, yes, this is this, so with an institution like the Long Beach Art Museum behind them, they could get the necessary permissions, and the money that was donated for the project would have a nonprofit to put it, so, and then it just got spent right back out to them. But I did do an exhibition of the work, and I did help them where I could. They edited their video at our video studio afterwards. They put the documentation together at our video studio. I was at every one of the events, all 3 nights that it happened, and watched it evolve. One of their concerns was that it not be seen as an art world insider event. They wanted it to be completely unannounced. So the first night, it was simply, well, a few friends of theirs came, but it was simply people who were passing by this big screen, caught unaware of what was happening and realizing what it was. And then they would explain, well, it's going to be 3 days. So by the 3rd day, there were people holding up babies. And what we didn't plan for and didn't expect was the piles of trash that were left afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Because people bring their signs, and they bring drinks to toast, and all that stuff was left. So that was a kind of unusual thing we didn't expect. I mean, it was an amazing work, and the artists were extremely dedicated, and they were all in. They had a team of videographers and technicians that just put their all into the project. It was incredible. I think nobody knew if it was going to work really because there was no rehearsals or anything. I mean, they did testings, of course, but you never can really predict these things 100%. So it was giant risk for them and for the funder, the Broadway department store, which I think is an amazing sponsor. And they also gave their big window and all the space behind the window because they had to set up all this equipment in a Lincoln Center in New York was the other site. So it was point to point.
Your activity within the field of media art began around the early 1980s
Yeah.
when commercially available technology began to flourish at a pace previously unseen. Was there a specific project that used technology in a particular novel way or that surprised you when you first encountered it?
Well, I think what was, I can't answer your question directly. I think all of the artists working with technology in these early years were all quite different. That wasn't like one way they were focusing or one direction. Artists were interested in television. They were interested in interactive communication. This was way before internet, or even the pre-internet. This is really thinking about communication or big communications were the telephone, the radio, and the television and radio and telephone. So artists were using all of those things. They were using
Okay.
radio, they were using the telephone. There were a lot of telephone projects in the early days, and they were using video. And we kind of exchanged the word video and television, just kind of it was television technology. It just wasn't being broadcast, but cable, we used a lot of things on cable.
You have mentioned that part of freelancing requires multitasking, writing, being a cultural critic, and much more. What has been your favorite part of freelancing?
Well, when you freelance, you don't have to do a lot of things that you have to do when you work in an institution or a faculty member at a university. You don't have committee meetings. You don't have to justify things in the same way that you do when you're working in an institution. There are pluses and minuses. For me, it was just a natural way to continue working. After a certain time, you get really sick and tired of the institutional processes, and you have enough connections and ideas of your own, so you don't really need that infrastructure in the same way. And you can partner with organizations.
Given your experience with influencing the current art world and digital mediums, what is your vision for the future regarding emerging artist roles and impact for the next generation?
I've more or less stepped back from being a person who feels that they're an influencer. I mean, maybe at one time I could have been called that, and I did that gleefully and willingly without any consideration for what anybody thought, because I was just convinced that this was what had to be, and that's how I operated. You go through phases in your life, and sometimes you're at a moment where you have opportunities and you are absolutely by necessity must take them. And even if it means that it's a great amount of stress or you get a lot of critique or whatever, you still have to take those chances. So I did that. I'm not doing that so much anymore. I'm more in the role now of, like what we're doing here, is trying to fill in some blanks about who were the human beings involved in what happened at that time and what were they like and stuff like that. I'm more of a historical person. This was over 20 years ago. This stuff was going on, 20, 25 years ago. I didn't even remember the names of the artists in these shows. I had to go look it up myself. So, I've done a lot of shows since then, and a lot of big projects and, huge exchanges and stuff. So these were things done under a lot of pressure, even, during the time I made an international move and started a new job and all that stuff. I was working on those 3D shows. And so, it was, sometimes you look back, you don't even know how you did it all because there weren't enough hours, but, you do it. And it happened, and they were very exciting times. I mean, some of the most exciting times we had some good times in working with this 3D consortium. And at one time we were presenting at this big, they had one of the conferences in Germany in Paderborn. Okay, so I was by this time living in Europe, so it was wonderful. We got a lot of people to come. And at this particular conference, it was amazing because we had a lot of women there who were working with 3D. And we even, somewhere in my file of photos, there's a picture of all of this. There must have been 10 or 12 women who came and were all really doing wonderful work. I mean, including Tamiko Teal, including Catherine Ruiz from RPI, and there's a number of other women that were, Ahiro Paiori from Paris. These are some that I kept in touch with over the years, for sure. But there were a lot, and this was very exciting. And in my mind, I think at that point I made a kind of shift, and I recognized that these women stood apart from the rest of the guys who were there, because it was really, the consortium was really run by some military men from Monterey, and they were great. There were no problem there, but they were quite heavy, and they were the ones. And so, and they were using these things for scientific means, and so that was important. So we came with women who were making some very different kinds of work, and I thought that was important. And it gave me an opportunity to kind of shift my focus, personal focus, to focus more on work by women.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.